Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. A delegation from the Kurdish-led administration in northeast Syria met with central government officials in Damascus on Sunday to discuss the integration deal between the two entities. In March, the Syrian Democratic Forces, aka SDF, reached an agreement with the new Syrian government to integrate the former into the state's institutions. Al Monitor reported on Monday that the meeting yielded a prisoner exchange deal between the SDF and Damascus. The ongoing normalization talks between the SDF and Damascus could dramatically change Syria's landscape. The Kurdish-led and US-backed SDF and the Northeast Syrian administration maintained significant autonomy throughout the Syrian civil war, but their future became uncertain when the new Syrian government, led by former Islamist rebels Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, came to power in December. Both the US and Turkey are watching the situation closely. Ankara considers elements within the SDF to be affiliates of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, aka PKK, but the US supports the SDF in its fight against ISIS. On Tuesday, Al Monitor reported that Turkey and Syrian Kurdish officials had begun talks last year as part of Turkish efforts to end its decades-long conflict with the PKK. In this episode, we hear from Al Monitor's chief correspondent, Amberin Zaman. Amberin takes us through her exclusive reporting on these issues, including progress in the normalization talks between Damascus and the Northeast, the context for Turkey agreeing to discussions with Syrian Kurds, and why the U.S. is pushing for the involved parties to come to an agreement. Hope you enjoy. Amberin, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for joining and talking about all your interesting reporting recently. First question is, what is the state of relations now between Damascus and the Kurdish-led administration in northeast Syria? And is the normalization efforts making any progress?
Well, I'll start with the last part of your question, and the answer is absolutely yes. And we saw an exchange of prisoners, for example, that took place on Monday between the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the central government. And that was in the works for a while. And the fact that they managed to make it happen in the end shows that, the negotiations between them are actually delivering results. The fact that they're talking at all, in fact, is quite extraordinary, I'd say, given that initially Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president of Syria, was extremely standoffish with the Kurds. But all of that changed after the violence on the coast against the Alawites. And Shara, of course, felt extremely vulnerable in terms of the rest of the world, because everyone's watching very closely how minorities are treated in Syria. And obviously, rapprochement with the Kurds, of course, sends a very positive message in that respect. So since then, we've seen quite a bit of progress. On March 10th, as you know, Mazloum Kobani, the commander-in-chief of the Syrian Democratic Forces, signed a agreement, a framework agreement with Shara. And since then, we've had these talks. And so we also had a delegation from the Kurdish side meet with the central government in the past few days. And they took up a number of issues that are part of that framework agreement. And one of the priority issues is the one pertaining to high school diplomas from the Kurdish region, which are not recognized by the central government, which in turn means that those students who earn those diplomas, the Kurdish students, cannot sit for national university entrance exams. And those are happening, imminently. So that was a priority. But of course, there are far bigger issues that need to be tackled between the sides, notably the integration of the civilian institutions of the Kurdish-led administration, but also, and probably more importantly, given the stakes of the Syrian Democratic Forces themselves. So all of those are on the table.
And Amber, in what ways is Turkey involved in this process of dialogue between Syrian Kurdish authorities and the central Syrian government?
Well, Turkey is deeply involved. As you know, for a very long time, Turkey was extremely hostile towards the Syrian Kurds and was mounting continuous offensive against them, land offensives, air offensives, targeting what they called PKK elements. That's to say, members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the rebel group that's been fighting Turkey for the past 4 decades, and also their critical infrastructure, because they claim that the administration there is very closely linked to the PKK, and in fact that they're the same thing. And so they justified that hostility on that basis. But as you know, the Turkish government since last year has been holding secret negotiations that are no longer secret with the PKK to end their conflict. And in parallel to those talks, they've also been holding negotiations with members of the Syrian Kurdish administration. So this is kind of a package deal whereby they reach some kind of accommodation with the PKK on the one hand, who's now agreed to disband itself and disarm in response to its leader's call, its imprisoned leader Abdullah Öcalan's call on February 27. And at the same time, now we have the Turkish government and the SDF negotiating about the status of its forces in Syria, even as they also hold those same talks with the Syrian government itself, whereby any PKK elements within the SDF would be removed and be disarmed. And at the same time, Turkey seems to be signaling that it would be okay with a form of watered down autonomy for the Kurds, which of course is a big shift, because previously it was saying they were going to destroy what they called the terror state, which posed such a great threat to Turkey's national security, and that they would destroy the SDF, and they would continue attacking those forces until they disappeared. So a big shift in the Turkish approach, which is mirrored by Damascus's own approach to the Kurds as well. And so these talks are going on. I think the red line for Turkey is, on the one hand, any PKK elements remaining within those structures, and also none of these rights that are being accepted being constitutionally enshrined, but in any new constitution that we get in Syria, because Turkey itself is not willing, as it negotiates with its own Kurds, to put any of that stuff in the constitution. And when I say they don't want to put any of that stuff in the constitution, what I'm referring to specifically is any kind of defined autonomous status for the Kurds, be it in Syria or in Turkey. Neither of those governments want to do that, but they will tolerate a de facto form of autonomy where the Kurds elect their own mayors and they're policed by their own security forces.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Amber and Zaman after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25, for a discount.
Okay, we're back. And on the U.S. role, U.S. envoy to Syria, Tom Barak, was in Damascus recently. How does the Trump administration view the talks involving Turkey, the Kurds, and the new Syrian government? And why is the administration pushing for a deal?
The United States is delighted by the fact that Turkey is talking to the SDF because for the longest time, the United States felt very squeezed between the SDF, which is its top ally in the fight against the Islamic State, and Turkey, a key NATO ally, which was infuriated by that alliance because of what I explained previously, the claim that those forces and the PKK are the same thing, and therefore the United States was betraying its NATO ally by partnering with these so-called terrorists. And so they are playing a facilitating role and have been encouraging the sides to sit down. And now they have a new government, of course, in Damascus. Assad is gone. So that makes things that much easier because now they can bring the three sides together. And what they hope, of course, and certainly what Turkey hopes, is that over time, Turkey will be allowed to have a greater role. For example, in the fight against the Islamic State, they don't want that to be left exclusively to the Kurds, and they would like to triangulate that with Damascus and with regional governments, including Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon.
Amber, and thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting on these issues.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.